The only thing I would agree to in terms of tax changes would be tax incentives or tax breaks initiatives, for example, to get more solar on the roof. I think as we see the price of gas go from 4 down to 145, 125, depending on whether you're regular or supreme, we've got to be aware that there's a tendency for us and the legislature and the public to fall back asleep. We have to move now, and we have to move now on renewable energy. And the governor has said 70% within 2030. And I think it's going to take us to codify that in the next session. Particularly, my sense is until we have a solar on every roof, we should not stop pushing what otherwise is the global strategic position which Hawaii has. Renewable energy, not only of the wind and the sun, but we've got the sea, and we've got geothermal, and we've got a flood of opportunities by which we have not taken advantage of. So if we do anything and we manipulate anything tax-wise, I suggest we do tax incentives to buy electric cars. We give tax incentives for investment in renewable energy. We give tax incentives for wind and other renewable energies to move into the Hawaiian electric grid. That's the only way I would touch taxes.
In a recent article from the Honolulu Advertiser, the Director of Department of Human Services, Lynn, stated that we needed to urgently lift the freeze on TANF funds that's currently being held by the state legislature. She actually stated, if legislators vote to remove the spending freeze they imposed last session on our federal anti-poverty funds, an additional $28.2 million would instantly be available to help meet the needs of Hawaii's most vulnerable residents. Why wasn't this released last year? Who will this affect if released? And how important is it to release these funds?
Sarah, what I want to do is kind of take a step back in regards to your question and just say, okay, how do we get to that place where the $28 million, is actually frozen? Last year, the Republicans fought tooth and nail on this, on this particular subject, because what we said was it's a fundamental Republican principle that says we want to prevent poverty. We want to be able to help those help themselves and not necessarily just dish out money. And that is not only for the sake of someone who is receiving a monetary government allowance, but it's also for those who are possibly, in danger of getting to that level. And so we were basically saying the best thing that you can do is spend it on preventative programs, help people get on their feet, give them a hands up instead of a hand out, a fundamental principle of the Republican philosophy. And last year what happened was you had a situation where because I can only say that it was because they don't like the way that Lillian Kohler has control over these TANF funds, that they restricted it and said, well, we need to reserve this money to be able to give cash assistance. Well, in turn, what has happened, and some of our arguments that we said on the House floor, was, but what if something happens from now, which was last year, until this legislative session? How are we going to answer the needs of those who need help because this money is frozen? And we said legislative action. We cannot take legislative action during the off session. I think there was very good argument to say, and even Lillian Kohler, our Director of Department of Human Services, said, you tell me how you want to spend it in a preventative way, and I will do my best to spend it in that manner. Instead, they froze it. Now what we're asking is this legislative session to unfreeze it and allow for this spending to take place to help those who are in need and prevent them from actually going into cash assistance.
I can speak from 3 years of personal experience that the best poverty reduction program is not feeding people fish, but teaching them how to fish. After my 3 years in the Peace Corps, it works. People, when they learn and become self-reliant, then, as you said, not a handout, but a hand up. It's something that's going to be giving them independence, not dependence upon the government. And right now we have 25 to 30% of the population of Hawaii dependent upon government for some form of transfer payment or dependency. And this one is the prime example. Instead of taking the money to do training, we've said, well, we need the money for a rainy day when you don't have any food. Well, the point of getting the training is in order to get a job and be productive in order to get the food. So I think it's an example of the legislature micromanaging the executive. It's taking, tying the hands, if you will, of Lillian Kohler. I mean, she's a professional. She should know what's going on. And she always said, even if I'm wrong, you guys can reverse this by canceling the contract in 30 days. So why they've done that, I think, is possibly some of the provocative jealousy that the administration brings.
You know, Gene, one of the things that I remember so clearly is last year when some of these programs and some of these people that were being helped through the TANF funds, they came to the legislature and they said, I don't want cash assistance. I want to be able to earn money and provide for my family. That is what I want. I don't want to get a government check. But what we do all too often is we don't give them enough credit that they can achieve what they want to achieve. And all they need is some assistance to get there. And so I feel very passionate about that. I mean, I know that there are people out there that with the right kind of help that they'll be able to be, self-sufficient. And I believe in that principle.
And that's a very strong pillar of the Republican philosophy,
Absolutely.
of making people independent, self-reliant, rather than dependent.
Because then you have more money for others.
And who better makes decisions about their own money, the government or the people who has the money?
Yeah.
I think that's pretty obvious.
So a very contentious issue, but we're looking to this legislative session to correct that.